Welcome to Seymour from the Front Pew podcast, coming to you from the broadcast studio at Seymour First Baptist Church in Seymour, Tennessee, and featuring thoughts and discussions around loving God, loving others, making disciples, and living the life. I am your host, Tiger Brooks, and now, on to the podcast. Welcome into another episode of Seymour from the Front Pew podcast from Seymour First Baptist Church in Seymour, Tennessee. We have a special guest with us today.
Hey, listen!
And we are delighted to have her. This is Hanah Jenkins.
Where's your little applause button? Well, it's too late now. Come on, man. You got to be Johnny on the spot. There it is. That was short-lived.
I like that. That's good.
All right, you're going to have to scoot closer to that microphone or drag it over to your face, Hanah.
Pull it up.
All right, so Hanah Jenkins is, she and her family are members of Seymour First Baptist Church for a while, but she also serves in the capacity as a worship ministry assistant to Austin. And we
pray for her often.
We do.
Often.
I appreciate that.
We are delighted to have her here, and she's a wonderful help to all of us in many ways. But because she has extra special adjacency to the worship ministry, I just made that up.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a good word. That's a good word. Mark it down. That's a new word. You can put it in your Funk and Wagnall dictionary. Add it to there. All right. So Austin, today's
most people
episode.
would go with Webster.
I am not most people.
That is very true.
We're going to talk about all things worship today.
Yep.
And we are going to approach it from everything from the why of some of the choices that we have purposefully made here at Seymour First Baptist to the elements that we utilize in worship, and some of the philosophical understandings and underpinnings to why we do those things. But so Austin's been here 4 years.
Almost 4.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's 21. So
yep.
January, it'll be 4 years.
January will be 4 years.
And so, Corey can speak into this obviously as well, but I mean, you were chosen, God called you here because of, some of the things that you have held strongly. And I think it's worth helping people understand, why you're wired the way you're wired, because the way you grew up.
There is no understanding of that.
Well,
I would agree with that.
Where we're coming from. People who know that's true. There are some
history and a family.
There's some experiential things
that
there
speaks into some of that.
Have to be there. So kind of share that with us.
Yeah. I grew up the son of a music minister. My dad was obviously a music minister all my years. Just recently retired. So grew up in church and everything. His dad was a pastor. And so my grandfather, Paul Clark Sr., had 4 kids. 3 of them landed in music ministry for most of their career. So my dad was a music minister. My uncle was a music minister for many years and then wound up being the head of music and worship for the Tennessee Baptist Convention. And then one of my aunts also was a music minister. So it just kind of ran deep, and then it filtered through all of us. We're all musicians and everything. So most all of the 432 Clarks that there are in music in some way, form or fashion. And many of us either leading worship ministry or connected heavily in our churches.
Yeah.
So there is, a lot there. For
your granddad was even known to sing a little bit.
He was
a singing pastor.
He was a singing pastor. Yeah. In fact, and you'll hear me talk about that sometimes. But I can hear in my mind's ear. His favorite hymn was "The Love of God," and he's been gone for 20 years now. but I can hear him singing the love of God. I can hear his voice, and I mean, I never grew up in church with him because we were in our church.
Yeah.
But yes, he was quite the singer himself.
So obviously, this is 2024, and there are as many variations on the ways that churches worship today as nearly as there are churches. And so we're not going to get into necessarily the worship war discussion, which one's better than the other, because that's just meaningless. But there's some choices that we've made.
Right.
So why is it that Seymour First Baptist Church utilizes the components of worship that we utilize?
So when we talked about it, right before we started this, Tiger said, okay, where are we going to go? And I said, I've got a million things I think we could talk about. But at the end of the day, I'm wondering, you rewind 4 years from right now, and I'm having interviews with a personnel committee, and then 4 years from 3 weeks from now, and I'm coming and having conversations with the few people who were there for an interview weekend. And we're having conversations about what is worship going to look like at Seymour First Baptist? What do you value? All those things. Well, now, if you have come in those last 4 years, you just know us as what our identity is.
Right.
So that you never were a part of the conversation about how do we shape that identity. And I think that's maybe some of the goal of this podcast is to talk about why our identity now is what it is. If we were to rewind 4 years and have that conversation again, about who we are and where we are, because when you're coming into a church, it is a mixture of who I am and how I'm wired and where I feel like we should be led, but also taking a temperature of who this church is in their worship language, and then what they need to become in their worship language. Because if I just come in and say, I know what to do, we're going to do it my way, I might be somewhat right. But if that's not taking into account the people that we have, then you become just not actually resonating with the people, which is the whole point of worship, of what we do musically and in the everything outside of the preaching on Sunday morning should be to connect to the people.
It's hard to shove square pegs into round holes.
Right.
It gets old after a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the cool thing, I mean, again, I hadn't thought about this a lot because, but even what we were dealing with 4 years ago in that search and in that process, what we foresaw, what we thought, we're really hitting on a lot of it, I would say.
Yeah.
And all that to say is we haven't landed here by chance.
Right.
We went into it with a vision and a plan and a thought. You don't always know if that's going to work or not.
Right.
But it really has hit. I mean, anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
It's landed where I think, and beyond what I think we would have said we thought we would. And I think a good element of that, and maybe I'm getting the cart before the horse, but would be when we realized, if you rewind about 2 years, we're not where I want us to be in this thing, and I think we have a lot more room to grow. But you look at Seymour and surrounding area, predominantly white, middle class. But one of the greatest kind of our way to stretch ourselves is in the Hispanic language area. Mm-hmm. And so you add that when TKA began to bring their international students here, it was hey, we need to make sure that our worship language is including that. So we've begun to walk down, including some Spanish in what we do, or trying to reach out in some other areas that is a little more multicultural. And so that is one of those things where you're adjusting based on when you look around the room, hey, we're kind of missing this area. Let's begin to go down that road, and maybe that'll develop into its own thing. Maybe it'll just continue to grow. But you got to be willing to see what the change is and move. So we've moved a lot of those things. So anyway, you go back to why we kind of do what we do. We began with understanding that we want to be theologically based first, gospel based in what we sing, not genre based. Words matter, and you'll hear us say that over and over again, and that filters into everything we say corporately needs to have some depth and have some meaning behind it. You'll notice I was challenged, I think 2-ish years ago, about making sure that what you're singing is driven by Scripture. And so we take time to make sure there is Scripture that backs everything we sing. So you'll notice that the title slide every week has Scripture associated with it. And because we're not just doing a song just because we like it, we're doing a song because it is actually scriptural.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
rooted in sound theology.
Right.
It is, yeah. I mean, just there is thought and purpose behind what we're doing and
Right.
why it's being done. Yeah.
And I, on a side note to that, my dad, he did a podcast before he left the church that he retired from, and he made a really good point of what kind of their mantra was for the 7 years he was there, is that you've got to remember that in worship, in the music side of worship, corporate worship, what you are doing is you're creating a soundtrack for the life of the believers in your church. And, we all, I would assume most of us around this table, but most people have a soundtrack to their lives. In our house, there's music playing a lot. When I'm cooking, Alexa's on playing music. What does that music that's kind of going through my house all the time, what does that teach my kids? And what is that transferring into them? Well, even more important is what is it when we're in corporate worship, what are the songs that I'm writing on my life, that I'm writing on my kids' life, that they will come back to in their moments of crisis, in their moments of joy? What are the songs that just come to you? And if you are not creating a soundtrack for people's life that has text that they can lean on when they need it the most, then I think you're doing a disservice to them. And the purists would say, well, if you're just repeating the same lyric of, whatever it is over and over again, you're really not creating a depth in your people. And I would say there's some truth to that. So I'm trying to create a soundtrack that pulls, that when the song pops to your mind and you're mindlessly thinking about just singing it, that also is a text that when you do turn your brain on, it's like, I needed that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe anyway. That I feel like maybe I got off track real quickly on that.
No, I think it's right on track though. I mean, and I think I think that same type of thing speaks into our approaches with choir and orchestra and different musicians, and all, because the soundtrack of our lives includes just what makes up who we are and all of those types of things. And the reality is that, again, we valued choir when we had like 12 that weren't even doing choir because we were
In COVID.
and all of this stuff. But to me, again, and I think you and I had some conversations around this with the committee or whatever else, is that we viewed choir as a valuable place for people to serve. It's a servant spot in the life of the church, and it's not a performance spot.
Right.
Are there times where the choir is singing alone? Yes. But it's a servant spot. It's a place where people are gifted. It's a place where people are connected. It's an expression of emotions and feelings and all those types of things. And so it's a valuable place to let people do that and connect that through meaningful words and meaningful theology and all those types of things. And so there was a value there. And then I think, again, what we've seen is God blessed that and grew that. Part of that is Austin's love for choir and choral stuff, which again goes to your history and even to your education or whatever else. And so
speak to that. So
why choir?
Why choir and orchestra? In a day and age when music is becoming more contemporary,
Right.
it's easier to work with a smaller group of people than a praise band.
Yes.
So why choir and orchestra and all this trouble?
So let's start with why choir, and then you can be thinking, because as a valued choir member, before you even came on staff, why choir? So A of all, when it comes to me, that's my degree is in choral conducting. I'm a choir person. I figured that out very early on. I love choirs. I would never, ever go to a job that didn't have choir. So that was part of the coming here. But why choir? So choir, as Corey said, is one of the better places to serve in the church because choir gives you a microcosm of what the body should look like. Choir, you do not have to be some fantastic soloist. Are there some? Sure. But actually, the better choirs that ever existed are based on good choir members, not good individual singers. And when you understand, I'm going to bring, this is my set of gifts, and I'm going to do my role, and you add numbers to that, you can create the greatest choir because it is built on, here's my lane, here's how I'm going to contribute, but how I'm going to help others, and then collectively we make this incredible sound. That's the church.
Yeah.
That's the church.
Yeah.
You bring what you have, and you give it your best, and the other people around you might have slightly different values, slightly different, not values, but things they bring.
Yeah.
But when you put all that together, you're going to make this incredible sound. You're going to make this incredible church. Well, choir is the best microcosm of that. So when you bring all those different gifts together, you can create this great thing. Plus, it's a great place to serve. More and more churches, and not throwing stones at them because I understand why, but are either nixing the choir or the choir struggling. But at the end of the day, you're giving people a chance to serve, a chance to use their giftings, and they are then leading in worship. Why does the choir sing every Sunday? It's not show. It's not a performance. You're right. It is. It's used to introduce songs to the congregation, but it's also, there's a lot of great stuff out there theologically and musically that pushes the bounds that we can't do congregationally.
And it's not written to be congregational.
Right.
I mean, like,
There should be things in worship that are meant for beauty.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And meant to be in awe.
To be sung over the congregation.
Sung over the
And
congregation.
for me, now again, most of the time I know the songs. I've heard them. I've
Right.
listened to them, which you can too through the Spotify playlist. Plug real quick, but I can worship with the choir singing without. I end up singing along. So if nobody's in front of me, they don't have to hear me anyway. But that's why the words are up there. We have, when the choir sings, the words are on the screen. They're there so that we can worship with it, fully absorb and worship with that. It's not a chance for us to check out and watch a performance. It's a chance for us to worship differently. Just as if we worship differently when we're doing baptism or the Lord's Supper or when I'm preaching a sermon. All of those are elements of worship, and the choir is an important part of that.
And plenty of people don't. The choir's not their thing.
Yeah.
They may not even enjoy listening to the choir, and I don't fault them for that. But I think that there is definitely a place in our worship for that, for us to understand this something a little more hard,
Mm-hmm.
and to sing it over the congregation, but also for it to speak into them and hear things. So that's the why choir aspect. Do you have any input?
Yeah. So let me set this up for you, Hanah, because I mean, you and your family made the choice, however many years ago, to come, and you obviously, if you don't know, Hannah's husband Josh is the drummer for the choir and orchestra. Phenomenal. He's a musician. And wonderful to work with. Two beautiful children who will one day grow up through, and that's another aspect of the worship thing, is that there's so many generations that have access to help in the worship ministry here, which I think it really whets their appetite and maybe gives them something to work toward one day when they get to be teenagers or whatever, and they're in the choir. But so, what attracted you to want for your family to want to be here? And then as you've heard Austin kind of articulate about the choir and the why, how have you experienced that in your personal life?
So Josh grew up in this church. He's been a member here for a long time. So when we got married, we were in Lenore City for a while. That's where we stayed for 10 or 11 years, I think it was. And then about the same time COVID hit, we had decided to step back from there. Not because we didn't love it up there or anything like that. It's great people. But, driving to Lenore City from Seymour every Sunday, every Wednesday, multiple times during the week. We just felt like we needed to be with our community closer to home. And so anyways, we started looking around, and we had visited several different churches, and we always would look to see if they had a choir. Josh and I were both in choir in high school. We both did music, through school, through college. And so that was important to us when we were looking. We weren't against going somewhere that didn't have a choir. If that's where we felt like we needed to be, we would have, stayed there regardless of whether they had a large choir or not. And a lot of them do have more praise teams, things like that now. But I definitely missed being part of the choir and that sort of thing. And so when we were looking, those were always the ones that drew me there, were the ones that had choirs. And we honestly were not thinking about coming here just because, we were trying to find where we needed to be. And Josh had been here, and that was kind of old, and we were looking for new. And Austin called Josh and said, "Hey, you want to come fill in for me one Sunday? I'm looking for a drummer. My guy's going to be out." And he said, "Yeah, sure." So we all loaded up and came and sat through. And that was the first time we had met you, Corey. I think you had been here maybe
6 months.
maybe a year, 6 months to a year,
Yeah.
or something like that. Yeah,
Not very
I don't
long.
remember. It wasn't crazy long.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a long time. And anyways, we came and we enjoyed the service and all the things. And so it kind of became a thing where Austin would keep calling Josh to come fill in. And we just kept coming back and kept coming back. But through that is where, of course, we met Austin. And as far as the choir goes, we hadn't even joined the church. And I was like, "Hey, can I sing in the choir?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And so,
And all that to say, you can. All right. I mean,
Yeah, you
like we
can,
maybe
yeah.
have people, you can sing in the choir without being a member of the church. And some people do and don't do that. And so just, I have a funny, this is a really an aside, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I can. I was a part of Austin's dad's choir. And Austin's dad had a hard and fast rule that you had to be at 3 choir rehearsals consecutively in a row before you could sing on a Sunday morning. So I was in Austin's dad's choir for about 6 months, and I never sang on Sunday morning because I worked a job where I had to work nights. And about every third week, I would end up on a Wednesday night where I couldn't get to choir rehearsal. But it didn't keep me from, I still went to choir, I still had a lot of fun and enjoyed. And Austin's dad was a fun choir rehearsal also. And so I was a part of Austin's dad's choir, but never on a Sunday morning. So anyway, but
That's hilarious.
Yeah, anyway, it's kind of fun. So anyway, but my other aside, real quick, sorry. I'm going to
go ahead. Go ahead.
Josh is a phenomenal drummer for worship. His ability to change styles, to do different things. I listen around to some of that stuff, and I've played a little bit of drums here and there or whatever else. And his ability to morph and to, in the middle of that, never be the dominant sound when you're not supposed to be. He does an amazing job. So.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give him credit too publicly. Now it's on record.
Oh, there you go.
I don't give him enough credit. He is a very good drummer. So, anyways, you were talking about choir and just bringing people together and all that. And I was going to say earlier, that's my favorite part of choir. I don't like being in front of people. I enjoy singing solos. I don't like the aspect of being in front of people, laying my worship out in front of people. I've never been comfortable doing that. And so when you sing in the choir, and even if you don't, you mentioned, some people, choir's not their thing, you can worship individually. But for me, having a choir and worshiping together with all those people, that's what makes it for me. That's why I enjoy choir. I mean, I love singing. I love being challenged when we do, harder choir pieces and that sort of thing. But I love being with everybody else up there worshiping together. That's my favorite part of choir. So
Yeah, and I think that's the other side of being a microcosm of the church, is that church is about gathering people together and people marshaling all of their unique giftedness and talents toward the glory of God and to fulfill the mission and obligations that he has placed upon us together.
Yeah.
And it, when you're up there, this is the first time I've been in the choir, normally, regularly, outside of just special, Christmas and stuff. This was the first time in 15 years that I'd been in a choir normally. And I was in the choir as a teenager into my 20s. And then when I got called to the ministry, I had to step out because of the other obligations. And it just so happens that it lays out here for me to be able to do it. And I'd forgotten how much I missed it.
Yeah, so this is the first place where I've not regularly been in the choir.
Yeah.
So my former church,
You're missing out.
I know, I do. I like my other church. Every Christmas I always sang with the choir, and most Sunday mornings I sang with the choir, and then I would come down and preach afterwards or whatever else. And so I love that also, and I have a great choir voice, so because it doesn't have to be perfect, but yeah. Anyway, adding on to all that, having choir is not uncomplicated. I mean, I don't want to belabor this, but we value choir enough to work through the complications. We have had, just throwing a few things out there, and we don't have to latch on to any of these hard. Hannah's job is harder because she's got choir to get ready for every week.
Well, she's here because we have a choir.
Yeah, really.
You're gainfully employed because there's no way that you could do all the stuff that we need to do to support the choir.
Just having the music ready for rehearsal, all those other things. But beyond that, okay, so, and for good reason, we are making another sound change in the next couple of weeks.
Right.
And the reality of driving that is that our choir has gone, in 4 years, our choir has gone from 12-ish to, with Christmas, hopefully 100-ish.
More than that.
And the capacity and what is needed to be able to do that well with sound and equipment is different. We
exceeded it several a year or so ago.
And all that, again, these are not things that we bemoan doing, that we aren't in favor of doing or whatever else, but not everyone understands that all the time, that we are altering and changing and doing and investing money in and time in and all these things because we value these things.
Right.
And so there's a reason, and again, I think we also, one of the reasons we value is because we want people to plug into those areas and to serve in those areas and to worship in those areas and to connect with other people. For me, again, I think back to Ricky's choir that I never got to sing in, right? But I met people as a 22-year-old. I met people and sang with people that I wouldn't have met otherwise, senior adults and 40s and 50s couples, and that I would not have known otherwise. But I sang in the choir with them. I sat beside them, laughed at Ricky's corny jokes, all that stuff.
So that's where he gets it.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's honest.
So yeah, it does, and it does come at a cost, and it is, as Corey's saying, it's a very great cost. Or worthwhile cost.
Yeah.
Choir literally costs a lot of money. Every anthem we sing costs $400 to $500 now. With all the copies and all the things, it costs Hanah a whole lot of time making copies, making sure all the music is out. And then there's a certain choir member that likes to, for some reason, squirrel away extra copies of everything we do in Tiger's slot. And so every time you look at Tiger's slot, even though he doesn't actually even have a folder himself because he uses his iPad, there's 5 copies of every song in his slot. Anyway, so
It's psychological.
This is all new to me. I didn't
know this?
No, I didn't know this. This is cracking me up.
I'll let you know who later. So there, and there's a lot of organization of all that stuff. The choral library is the bane of Hannah's existence, but she does an awesome job at it. And then why orchestra? It's the same thing. It's the exact same example. You have so many people, especially here, the orchestra is only the tip of the iceberg of what I would love it to be eventually.
Yeah.
We have some incredibly talented musicians. Let me rewind by saying this, and I'm not throwing stones at people. I'm really not, because everybody's different and everything. But I have always had a really hard time. Some of the best instrumentalists, again, if you're listening to this and you're not Baptist, and you please don't misunderstand me. Some of the best instrumentalists I've ever known were Church of Christ. And
They didn't use it in worship.
they don't use it in their gift in worship, and that blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I've had a really good friend who was a very good instrumentalist. He was Church of Christ, and we had these conversations. We used to bike together all the time. We used to have this conversation all the time, and I would just say to him, "It blows my mind that you never use your gift in the church." And he would go, "But I have other gifts that I use in the church, and I use my gift. I can still use it in worship in the context of how I teach and everything." And I was like, "But you're not using it in church, man. I don't understand that." So, if you don't offer, and I know that that's a nuance, because if your gift is the kazoo, like now you're not going to be able to play the kazoo every week in worship. It's not going to happen. Ethan Maynor is an awesome banjo player. He's not going to get to use that banjo every single Sunday in worship. But if your gifting is in an instrument and you're really good at it, if I didn't make an avenue for Becky Terry to use her incredible gift at the clarinet every week for worship, I think I'm doing a disservice as her worship pastor. And so, and you've got a lot of really good instrumentalists out there. We live just Seymour school system, incredible band.
Yeah.
So I've loved. They're kind of seasonal because of marching band is so demanding and all that things. But band, you look at our orchestra, the ones at least on roll, at least a third are under the age of 21.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, and again, that comes at a cost. You'll hear me tell them all the time, I realize some of these things are too advanced. Play the notes you can. Ignore the notes you can't. I frequently go into a Wednesday night rehearsal and say, okay, measure 35 and 36. Just don't play it. Just ignore like it's not there.
Yeah.
And play the other things.
But sometimes they're pivotal and they're really helpful.
Right.
I heard a conversation last night. Austin went to someone and said, I really need you this Sunday because this instrument really kind of drives part of this song, and you can do it. Like, I know you can do that or whatever else. And so anyway, and it adds a fullness to everything that I love. Like, I'm not an instrumentalist, but Melody has played French horn in worship since like 9th grade. She would actually say that she's as good as she is at French horn because she played church music. And you're sight reading new songs almost every week and all these other things. And
side note, for all those out in the congregation, Melody is like an incredible French horn player. So much so that like people who come to our church just to visit or whatever, I've had multiple come up to me and be like, how did you get that French horn player? Like, dang. She's good.
I brought her along with us.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, like, but like that, she would attribute that not to high school band, which she played in high school band, but to playing in worship music every week because it challenges you differently or whatever else. And again, I think the challenge there would be again, okay, if you haven't played in a long time, there is an avenue to get back in and to do that. And I think about a guy from one of our former churches who had not played in 20 years and decided he was going to pick up and start playing again. And it was rough in the beginning, right? I mean, but there was an avenue to get back to playing regularly and doing that and using that talent. And Austin is completely up for that.
Yeah. Bring it on. We can help in all those things. So that's the Y orchestra. Band is pretty obvious. It's just the nature of what. And one of these days we need to do a podcast. I've got a lot of really cool stories. Josh and Hanah are one of them. But I've got a lot of really cool stories about how God, and I think probably in other ministries too, but God brought people to this church at a time and how he worked in those to bring them and then where we are fast forward. But anyway,
sorry.
That's a whole nother topic.
It is a whole nother topic, but like for me and what I see is that doesn't happen if you don't use talent though.
Yeah.
If you don't put people into service, if you don't let people use that gifting, then the people with that gifting find somewhere else. And so to me, that's a testament to Austin being willing to use everybody, and us valuing using and I say using, I'm not meaning that as in like we're using somebody, but just that we are
Creating a space for them to use their gifting.
correct. Yes, that's what. Yes. So anyway, but when we say, hey, there's a place for you to use your gifting for worship and in worship and to lead and to others that are gifted tend to be drawn to that.
Let's we're getting toward the end of this, but
Yeah,
I
that's
think
what-
just
sorry.
real quick, let's speak a little bit to the choices of the variation of the styles of music that you can find on a given Sunday, and from the choir music to the things that you could listen if you listen to K-Love or something like that on your radio.
So, and that's where, we may just need to do a second one.
Yeah.
But there's a lot, and I guess at the end of the day, I ask for a lot of trust to understand that I pray through it. I am seeking wisdom in that and relying on what wisdom the Lord has given me. So I'm not beyond being challenged in those choices and stuff like that, but and I love for people to send me ideas, but also I'll get that question a lot. Do you take requests? And I'll say, as long as my stock answer is, as long as you're okay if I say no, as long as you understand that, sometimes I'm going to say no. Why we do what we do. There is a myriad of music out there. Okay. My uncle, before he passed, he wrote a book. And in the intro, he uses the analogy that he was a guitar player just like I am, and he was my grandfather handed him a guitar, first time he'd ever played it, and he looked up, how do you make a G chord? So he put his first finger on the right string, second finger, third finger on the right string, took his hand, strummed it, and it went.
Mm-hmm.
You can make the exact right chord, you can strum it just right. But if the strings aren't actually ever tuned, you can't make the right chord. So how do you tune a guitar? Well, you've got little tension winders, and you pluck the note, and it has to be tightened or loosened to get to the right frequency. And you have to do that through all six. And then once you do that, you have to do it again, because by the time you've done the sixth one, the first one's out again. That's called tuning a guitar. Okay, any instrument you have to tune, but a guitar is really a good example because it is about tension. It is about how much tension you're putting on that string. And it is only once all six of those strings are at the exact right tension that you can then make the chord with your left hand and strum with your right hand, and it sounds the way it's supposed to. A lot of churches out there a lot of worship pastors out there are the left hand and the right hand of the guitar, trying to make a G string, a G chord, trying to strum it, but the strings are completely out of tune. You have to tighten and loosen people in your congregation to the right, stretch them to the right frequency so that you can make the right sound. And so it takes all six strings to be right. So what you're doing in people is, here is where I need to stretch you, and here's where I need to loosen you up just a little bit. And then we can make this collective sound together. And that's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
And so with worship music, what we're doing is there are some of you that need to be stretched a lot because you're way out of tune. There are some of you that need to be loosened a lot because you're way out of tune. But once we get you to submit to that and to understand that it's not you as the E string needing to be tightened. Once you're tightened, then everything else is already in the right frequency, and we can be right together. That is it congregationally. So, yeah, people will come in. We had somebody visiting recently who even said, this is really not our style of music, but they're still here. And when you understand, and I hope we're educating our people with that yes, you can have your style. Everybody has their style. But when you understand the bigger picture of who we are as a church, then you begin to understand it's not always about my style. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to get some of that. But just as much as maybe if your style is the K-Love kind of thing, and you're my age, and you can enjoy that, and there's nothing in the world wrong with that. It's awesome. I'm glad you listen to Christian music. But your kids also probably need to hear Turn your eyes upon Jesus, and the things of this earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and his grace. And if you're just listening to K-Love, you're not going to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
By the same token, a lot of people, those old school hymn folks, they think there's nothing good new. And that's painting in real broad strokes, but man, we're living in a day and age. If we were in the 90s, I would somewhat agree when we were in the heart of the worship wars, there's a lot of repetitiveness and stuff. But I mean, goodness, we're singing this coming out Monday. We just sang 2 brand new songs on November 10th. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's just straight out of the Bible.
Right.
We're singing Come Unto Jesus, which is one of the texts that has been resonating with me incredibly well lately. These texts you're not hearing on K-Love, and they are both written within the last 2 years. You need that kind of stuff in your life. So anyway, and then like why we do what we do, and there's a spreadsheet in my head of songs that have staying power and have had staying power for a very long time. The hymns we've been singing forever. There are songs that are older, that are hymns, quote unquote, but I would say don't have the greatest staying power. We've kind of taken them out of our liturgy as our context. Or maybe you did grow up singing, but the one, and I remember when I came in an interview, I mentioned this in my question and answer time, and a lot of people were like, "Whoa!" And that's I have a real hard time singing "Victory in Jesus" because the last verse is in mansions of glory. And if we just take that S off of that song, it's theologically accurate. But with you having the S, you probably shouldn't sing it because it's not, it engenders this idea of I'm going to go up there and I'm going to get my mansion for me and we're all going to have our own. That's not what heaven is. And that threw a bunch of people, they were like, you don't like Victory in Jesus?
Well, so I would say it leads to not all old hymns were
Right.
theologically sound.
Right. That's the point I'm getting to.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there that it's part of your childhood it's part of my childhood, but probably not as sound as we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So there are those that have long staying power. There is a myriad of music that emotionally connects with people over the last 30, 40 years that is good because it'll connect with them, but it is not very deep. And so it has some staying power, and you'll see those sneak in, and we'll do those from time to time because it connects with people emotionally where they are, but not necessarily, I would call that like the French fries of dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Side dish.
It is a side dish, and it's good. You enjoy it, but it's not the healthiest thing in the world for you. So let's have them from time to time because it's great, but it's also not the same as eating your Brussels sprouts. Then there are those, let's go keep walking down that food
And of course.
analogy,
Of course we are.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There are dessert pieces.
Yeah.
And dessert pieces, you love it, but you don't need a healthy diet of it. And so there are songs, especially like the radio songs, I would say, that I listen to them and I'll go, that's going to be great for us to do 5 times over 9 months and then be done with it.
Yep.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And I need to be okay with that. So you'll say, man, I've been hearing this Phil Wickham song over and over again. I'm just picking on Phil Wickham. And I'll go, you're right. That's cool. Let's do it. It's got a good beat. Textually, I don't know. If it's not wrong, I'm not going to if it's wrong, I'm not going to do it. But so that's a dessert piece. And we're going to throw it out there and you're going to love it. You're going to have fun. It's going to enjoy it. But we're not going to let that be the meat of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the things that I would call the meat, potatoes, and vegetables of what we do. And some of those are old, some of them are new. But those are the ones that I look at the words and the melody and the texture of it, and I go, this is something we are going to sing a lot.
This is part of a well-balanced diet.
That's his mercy is more in Christ alone. And a lot of it, for me, and my taste comes in some, but it is the modern hymnody that is saying things that we need to remind ourselves over and over and over again that are part, going full circle, of the soundtrack of your life. And not just your life, I think even more in our context of your kids' life.
Mm-hmm.
That these kids that we are raising in this church and people who are new to the faith, they need to have a soundtrack of their life that has staying power and that they can hold on to in the highs and lows.
Yeah.
Austin does a great job too. I mean, like just because a song is great on the radio and we sing along in the car doesn't always mean it's singable in the church. Like,
Yeah, that's another big
yeah,
kicker.
and Austin does a great job with that, and really has brought that out to me a couple times. Like, yeah, that's a great song, but it has this weird syncopation, or it has this long 45 seconds, and there's no way for me to cut that out. I mean, you stand there for 45 seconds, and see how long it is, and
Right.
It's not easy to deal with those types of things, and yeah, that's great in the car as I'm driving down the road, but it's not so great when you've got 700 people in the room that are trying to sing, and then there's this, long pause.
So Beth and I were talking about that last week. We were at an event, and that CeCe Winans, "You're worthy of it all, worthy of it all." She was like, "Hey, this is a great song. It's in the right key. It would be the orchestration's really good. We should think about doing this." I said, "Yeah, but my hold up with that song, it's a good song. It's fun. I like it. But you go, you're worthy of it all. Tick, 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 tick. You're worthy of it all." And that it's a sing a measure, rest a measure. And that you will lose the congregation in those rests, because it is a lot of rest. And so, yeah, there's a lot of factors there that you kind of have to pull in.
Yeah.
Have to make it into a canon.
And
Worthy of it all. Worthy of it all. Worthy of it.
If we make all of that fit like church contextually and purposefully, we are multi-generational, multi-style on purpose. If you don't come 4 weeks and something you're not uncomfortable with in worship, I'm probably worried, because and I don't mean that uncomfortable with the words. I mean uncomfortable, like, oh, that's not my favorite style, because it is somebody else's favorite style.
Right.
And so, like, we want that push and pull, that tension, that we are trying to bring those things in line. And because we value, I think about my kids. I want my kids around senior adults. I want my kids around infants. I want the church to look like our communities look like. And all of those people exist here in Seymour. And so our worship ministry is purposeful in trying to be multi-generational, just as our church is trying to be multi-generational. And so, but yet still theologically sound in the words and in driving. And so that is a scope of and an element of all that
Of
purpose
what we're doing.
and all that.
Yeah.
And then, as I know we're close to the end, doxology. You got to hit on doxology, because we get that question all the time. Why do we do doxology?
Doxology. So we rewind to when I first came. We're setting up what we want worship services to be slightly different week to week and keep you on your toes. Obviously, we don't do an order of worship that's public, but there's still a form and a flow to what we do, and so every church I've ever been at, which is 7 now since I was first started, like in college. How to end a service is always a question. I've had pastors who had like a saying at the end that they would repeat, or whether it was a prayer. It's always like, just how do you end the thing? It's kind of weird. So we had that conversation early on, how to end it. I think we tried something a couple different ways, but it just nothing. I have never felt good about how we ever ended a service at any church. That's not good, maybe not, but it just left something to be wanting. And I knew early on I was going to push the bounds of a few things, what people were, bless you, what people were comfortable with. I knew that was probably going to be an homage. And even, this is a side note, one of the big conversations with me coming was I played guitar, and there were some people who didn't really want me leading from guitar. And it was like, okay, they're going to have to get over some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to start doing some music it's outside the scope of what they're used to. We could do a nod to the traditional by just including the doxology.
Yeah.
And most people beyond a certain age grew up with that in some form or fashion in their church. And so most people know it. The people who don't, my kids did not know it. And so it's like, what if we just close with the doxology? And I knew early on, our church sings, and that's a whole nother thing. Gosh, they sing so well. And so it's like, and let's do it a cappella. And you'll notice we do a lot of a cappella work on and off, because I want people to I don't want to lose the singability of what we do. So we tried it, and the first week, I think I had 40 people probably come up to me like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't heard that since I was a kid. We should always do it." And I was like, "Okay." And so we just kept it, and it is the perfect bookend.
Yeah.
To not only finish what we're doing, but to remind yourself of what you're going into, and we've just continued to do that. People will ask like why, but it's part of our DNA now. Another cool side story: David Steffen, who is Melody's Corey's wife's uncle, who is a church member here. David was the worship pastor in the 80s at Calvary Baptist Church. Maybe even, I don't remember the years. Anyway, where my grandfather was the pastor. So David was my grandfather's music minister. And the organ player at that church was my grandmother. So David, from early on when he started visiting, he laughed because at Calvary Baptist Church every Sunday, they would take up the offering. And as soon as the offering comes back up to the altar, there went my grandmother on the organ. Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-ba. Praise God from whom. So he thinks it's funny that that's what we do here to close our service, because he just hears my grandmother playing the little intro for it on the organ. But
Awesome.
But yeah, that's why the doxology, important words.
Very cool. With that, we're going to bring a close to this episode. We'll probably come back around to some other things.
Sorry, one more.
Yeah.
I give Austin a hard time all the time, and we pick at him, and we do that because
I was debating.
We
on
have a
doing
lot
this
of fun.
myself.
But we are super blessed.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah.
Best boss ever.
Well, that's just anyway.
Yeah,
We are incredibly blessed, and I love how God has brought our vision for how we do worship and what we do, how that's been brought in line with our church, but not just that, just with our staff and with our pastors. So,
yeah,
I will not stop picking at him,
No.
or whatever else. But I want him to always know that we love and support him, and I want others to know that, because sometimes maybe you'll only see us picking at each other. But there's a lot of love in that, a lot of respect and a lot of appreciation for his gifting and his ability to lead in this area. So
I echo that. We probably people see me and Austin kind of going at each other more often than a lot of others, but it's all out of love. And I tell him often that I appreciate him and I love him, and I've been around a lot of musicians because my wife is one, and by virtue of what kind of my church path trajectory and things that I've been a part of, I've been around a lot of folks that are good musicians, and I've been around some great ministers of music. But I don't know that I've ever been around anybody that puts it all together as well as Austin does. And if people heard the amount of time that he does, because we have to hear it all the time. If you heard how much time he spends listening to different music and singing and picking out some things in his office, you'd appreciate it as well. And so just love you, brother. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks, guys.
And good stuff. Hanah, thank you for coming in. I know we didn't give you a whole lot of mic time, but you were a valuable part of this, and we appreciate everything you do as well. She was my assistant for a hot minute, and then she completely got pulled away from me, and I do miss you. Just kidding. I'm just saying it in front of Shelby because Shelby's my assistant now. Anyway, but no, we appreciate everything you do too. Thanks for listening. We'll come back around to some aspects of what we weren't able to touch on
in the
about
54
worship.
minutes of this one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but we've almost gotten one longer than the ladies podcast, but we're not there yet, and we don't intend to break that record. But anyway, thanks for listening. This was a lot of good stuff, a lot of nuggets. If you appreciated anything and wanted to share it with folks, we'd appreciate you doing that. You can always subscribe and make sure you don't miss any of these podcasts. And if you think of something that you would like for us to touch on, please give us an email. We would love to hear from you. Thanks again. And with that, let's say bye, folks.
see ya.
Bye-bye.
Hey, listen.
Thank you for listening to Seymour from the Front Pew. Our sole desire for this podcast is to glorify God by educating and encouraging His body. If you would like to learn more about anything you've heard today, feel free to reach out by email at staff@seymourfbc.org or by visiting our website at seymourfbc.org. If you're located near our community and do not have a church home, come worship with us at 10:15 a.m. on Sunday morning. Until then, we pray God's richest blessings on you and yours as you love God, love others, make disciples, and live the life.